all you fellow coffineers. This is Behn signing on from the great and mysterious forests of the Pacific Northwest.
And Carl's from the boring old Utah.
Don't you have anything mysterious in Utah?
No.
No?
Not that I can think of.
You're mysterious.
Thank you.
And we are two friends in a coffin. And today we have our second ghost host on, and was our very first commenter, our very first fan of the show. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Palestina Baronis.
Woo! We found her!
Hello! I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we were like, who is this person commenting on our page?
Which is great because I believe we're friends on Instagram.
Well,
so you should have known.
I would be shocked if I wasn't a fan because it's a great show.
well, you know, for those who like true crime and being funny and zany, I mean, we're not exactly like Sword and Scale where it's all serious and shit like that, right?
And that's what I like about it.
Yay! Well, I'm so excited to have you on. And there's also another tie-in as to what we're going to talk about today is where both of us actually came from.
Ooh.
Not me.
And that's not my mother's vagina.
Sorry, Dot.
Your dad's ballsack.
I can't believe I just said that, but okay, moving on.
Here we are.
Well,
Welcome.
why don't you tell them about where we grew up?
Well, considering no one actually physically grows up in their mother's vagina, I think you're in the clear on that as well. We grew up in the lovely boroughs. I'm going to use that term because literally no one uses that term.
Boroughs
of the South Shore in Massachusetts.
Does anyone actually use the term South Shore either?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is a real term. Although technically the
real term.
Technically the town that you were in, I feel like was on the edge. And it was like more heading Metro West.
Yeah, I mean, we were Plymouth County, so we're kind of on the, which is weird that Brockton was the county seat, even though it's so far away from Plymouth.
Right, and like Plymouth, which is it Plymouth County is named for, is like so far from Brockton. Mm-hmm. It's a really large landmass, I feel like, even though Massachusetts is a small state relatively compared to other states in the country, like it's still a pretty large chunk of land, I feel like.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were in neighboring towns. I was in Abington, and I like Josh said, I am a little bit younger, so we can't really say we've known each other since we were born. As he brought up earlier, I have known him since I was born, apparently. My own mother's vagina.
Yeah, our whole families know each other, and yeah.
I really hope they listen to this later.
Oh my goodness. I don't even know if like I'm just like can just express. I don't even want to see the look on my mother's face.
Yeah.
My father would like pretend to be mortified, but then secretly try to snicker and laugh.
So Josh and I, while we knew each other since like through childhood, we really bonded the year that Titanic came out, the movie Titanic.
Oh my gosh.
And that was where we became like best friends.
Over
and
the
I
Titanic.
remember his mother was horrified that we went and saw that movie.
Yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, but I first saw that movie with my mother, and yeah, that was you could just imagine.
I remember crying because my parents wouldn't take me with them to go see it.
Oh,
Keeping in mind I was like 3 or 4, so of course they would.
Well, in case you didn't know, the ship sinks. They all die.
They all right.
They all die.
No. She doesn't.
Wait, so can we like backpedal here? So, Carl's, you're saying that you were sad, but you were only 3 and 4.
Yeah,
So you were really invested in the story of Titanic.
I was. I don't know how I was, but I have a vivid memory about them when I was like, I want to go with you to Titanic. And they were backing out, and I was just bawling in the window because they wouldn't take me with them.
That breaks
Aw.
my heart.
Such terrible parents.
And then when I finally saw it, I was in Cabo San Lucas, and then I wouldn't go into the ocean because I kept saying Jack died in there.
Oh, that's the saddest.
And my mom was like, it's a different ocean.
And you could actually paddle for like 2 to 3 days and survive in that ocean.
She's like, let alone the fact that he wasn't real. Yes, he is.
So for most people, it was Jaws. For Carl's, it was Titanic.
Titanic.
And just to let anyone know who's not from this area, you don't go to the Cape. You go down the Cape. Just so y'all know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though technically it's not south, it's to the east.
It doesn't matter. You go down the Cape.
You know, just because you live like halfway down the Cape.
It's true. I'm very close now. It's kind
Like
of
your
nice.
backyard is fucking cranberry bogs.
You're not wrong. It almost is, actually. Like you're literally within walking distance.
Oh, well, the place where we grew up, well, do you remember the good old days when you were a kid and you thought you were going to find the Loch Ness Monster?
No.
No? No?
You mean when you were a kid and you were filled with wonder and majesty?
But that is what happened to me, is that I said I was going to go and find the Loch Ness Monster. And me and a friend, not you, friend Palestina, different friend.
You have other friends.
Yeah, I think it's John Lloyd Daly, if I recall. And we would go and look in books because they didn't have such a thing as the internet in those days. We actually had to go to like books and see pictures and, you know. So yeah, we formed the Brockton Cryptozoology Society.
Cute.
There were only 2 of us. But what I
Very
didn't
active
realize is we were going to find the fucking Loch Ness Monster, and I had no idea that we could instead have gone like literally 4 miles away to find Bigfoot.
I'd rather find Nessie.
What? Why?
Because I like Nessie.
You've never seen Nessie.
I have in my mind.
Oh,
In my heart.
good point. Good point. Well, today we are going to be talking about the infamous Bridgewater Triangle. And the Bridgewater Triangle is this 200 square mile chunk of area, and it's triangular shaped, and it's in the South Shore of Massachusetts. And it basically goes from Abington in one end, where you're from, down to Rehoboth, and then down to Freetown, which if you go another 10 miles, it's Fall River. So I just say it goes down to Fall River. And that is the name that was given to this area by Loren Coleman, who in 1983 wrote Mysterious America. And he was a cryptozoologist, so kind of after my own heart when I was 9. And, you know, he basically was looking at reports and looking at the strange and the paranormal and all sorts of things. And he found that this area where we grew up was the site of an absurd number of sightings of the weird and the mysterious. And we're talking about a huge amount of different phenomenon, all in a relatively small area. It's not like up here in the Pacific Northwest where you have Bigfoot and it's like, okay, it's just Bigfoot. And it's like Bigfoot's range is literally like what? I don't know, 1,000 miles, like 1,000 by 1,000. So it's not like a huge area, and it shouldn't have all these different, and we've got everything from UFOs to Sasquatch and ape people to disappearances to murders to ghosts. It's an amazing amount of areas that was right in our backyard.
Do you have Pukwudgies?
The which?
Pukwudgies?
They did have Pukwudgies. You know about Pukwudgies?
I know about Pukwudgies.
Oh my gosh! How do you know Pukwudgies?
I've researched Pukwudgies.
What made you say I'm going to go research a Pukwudgie?
I was listening to the Lore podcast.
I love that podcast.
Me too. And they have this one about Pukwudgies. And I was like, what is a Pukwudgie? So I researched.
Well, tell us what a Pukwudgie is.
No, I'm nervous.
No?
You tell what Pukwudgies are.
Okay.
They're little things.
They're little things.
You think are going to be cute, but they may not be cute.
They're not.
They aren't. Trolls.
They're like, yeah, I think little trolls is a good accurate. They're like little, they're kind of like the official cryptid of Massachusetts, and they come from Algonquin mythology, and they're like these troll-like creatures that are covered with hair, and they're about 2 feet tall, and they're kind of very mischievous, and some people say they're spirits and others say they're living beings, and they apparently like do things like they'll trick you into walking off a cliff, or they will push you off a cliff, or they'll shoot you with arrows. I mean, they're pretty nasty little things supposedly.
Yeah, mischievous is kind of putting it nicely.
Yeah, it's
pushing you off a cliff is very mischievous.
They sound like assholes, actually.
They actually sound like dogs.
They have small man syndrome.
Be nice to dogs.
Well, I'm just saying, dogs like it's like what's his name? It's like Sloth from a chunk from Goonies. When he was in 3rd grade, he pushed his sister down the stairs and blamed it on the dog.
I was wondering if your dog Wompanoag had murderous tendencies or something.
A long roundabout for a short joke.
That was pretty bad. But I do have a good joke for you though.
I'm ready.
Okay, why couldn't the warlock have children?
Because he was sterile.
Because he had a Halloweenie. I got a second joke an old lady told me today at a funeral.
Tell me.
How do you make an old lady say fuck?
I don't know how.
You get a second old lady to say bingo. All right, that's all the jokes I have today. That's
been joke time.
that's joke time. So yeah, so the Bridgewater Triangle. I don't recall anything about this growing up. Like, it was never talked about. Nobody used the term. There was no talk about the paranormal in this area. Like, do you remember anything about this growing up?
Not a thing. It was actually really surprising for me to hear about this. So throwback to the podcast that Carl was just referring to. I heard a story about the Bridgewater Triangle, and I think that may have been the first time I'd heard of it. And the story that they were speaking of originated in Abington. And I was like, hold up, I grew up there and I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Not saying it's not real, because it was also in the 70s and I was born in the 80s, but it was a really fascinating story, and I was surprised that I hadn't heard of it.
But you would think if you'd heard about if Bigfoot was walking around in literally our backyards, and you would, even if it was just 10 miles away, don't you think people would talk about that? Where did this suddenly come out of nowhere where, all this is happening, and yet all these reports are suddenly coming to light.
Maybe it's just because you know how things go in waves of, oh, we talk about this now, we don't talk about this, so we talk. So maybe it just like wasn't a thing of people's knowledge and or discussion when you guys were younger and there, but now that things are getting talked about more and like there's more podcasts and stuff about it, it's getting brought back up and people are like, oh yeah.
It
I
could
think that's
be.
a fair point. I mean, there wasn't the internet when we were kids to like share things, right? But also, my experience was a little unique in the fact that I had been homeschooled. So I wasn't in schools with kids when I was younger. Not until I was in middle school was I in the public school system. But even then, I don't remember hearing about it.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of gossip around the jungle gym.
Not a lot of gossip around the jungle gym. Well, I mean, my parents did forbid us from going into the woods. And readily ran into the woods anytime they left us alone. I was the youngest.
I mean, is that just because like they're afraid of Bigfoot in the woods, or just like, hey, you're out alone in the woods and stranger danger?
Maybe
I mean,
both.
truthfully, it was probably the fact that there was swamp back there. My mom did not want us tromping through it and coming home disgusting. It's probably really the reason. But there was a big rock, like maybe 1/8 of a mile into the woods. Like realistically, as a kid, it felt forever. And we like to go back and climb on the rock. So, yeah, it's really weird now because my childhood home is destroyed and there was a daycare built on top of it. But even before that happened, the woods became very developed. So I remember going to my parents' house one evening and looking in the backyard and seeing lights coming through, which never happened as a kid because it was all woods.
Creepy.
It was super weird.
And it is in the last, to be honest, too, in the last 20, 30 years, I mean, maybe even longer, that area has really grown up and exploded as far as housing, population. It really is. Places that were very forested have been become more developed. So like Plymouth was a kind of a sleepy backwater, and now it's kind of like a hopping little, kind of
joint.
Like, I don't know. You could just kind of like a happening place to go, isn't it?
It is. I mean, downtown Plymouth especially has been so built up. I mean, to the point of like apartment buildings, including waterfront space that I used to enjoy seeing the water from, and it's like super annoying to now see buildings. But to hear that my sleepy town of Abington is now a like up and coming place to live is very surreal for me.
That's insane. Also, I'm sure the real estate prices in Abington having tripled.
I mean, it's just like crazy pricing all across Massachusetts, right? In this market.
Yeah.
This market is a horror story in and of itself.
We should do an episode on the housing market and how terrifying it is.
I think it'd be our highest rated.
It would be the top of all the podcasts. Well, this place of so much mystery that we didn't have any idea about, there was a shit ton of stuff that was going on there.
That's how good of a mystery it was.
Seriously, I mean, a lot of it too wasn't happening. Like the stories that I've read about, the stories that I've gone and researched, a lot of them aren't recent, to be honest. Most of them, from what I've been reading, do come from the 70s and the 80s. So it's almost too like, okay, that was the last generation. And then me and Palestina, which there really hasn't much been going on there. And it's really only since the 2000s where people literally going out to research the shit on their own paranormal searchers, people who are going out there and like, I'm going to go see what's out there. All these shows, ghost hunters, what's the Ghost Brothers? I mean, everybody now has done an episode on the Bridgewater Triangle, and there's tours and there's books and all this. So maybe it's also become I don't want to say a cult topic, but maybe.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of the episodes of the Paranormal Investigations?
Like Ghost Brothers?
Yeah, like any of the ones that you just mentioned.
I have. It's pretty funny. It's just like any paranormal investigation. It's like a lot of people just like running around trying to like do EVPs and shit that don't sound like anything, and like what was that? What was that?
So basically, like the Blair Witch Project.
That movie.
And they're all going into the woods at like 10 p.m. and you're like, nobody does that shit. I ain't going in the woods at 10 p.m. I'll trip over a fucking root or something.
Oh, 100%.
I do that at 2
When I'm
p.m.
camping to go to the bathrooms in the middle of the night because I clearly like a bear will eat me. So
First of all, there's the people, like all sorts of weird things going on with the people. Like there's been a series of murders throughout this area that are just really weird. Like in 1978, Mary Lou Aruda was found tied to a tree, and it had been 2 months after she went missing, and this was in the Freetown State Forest area. In the following year, in 1979, there was a series of, I guess you could call it a serial killer, because there were 3 murders, but it was the Carl Drew and Robert Murphy murders. And this was it was tied into like the whole satanic panic thing, except this was kind of a group that it was a prostitution ring, and Carl Drew was the pimp, and yet he was like this satanic devil worshipping leader of this coven of prostitutes, and anyone that displeased him, he used kind of the satanic rituals to keep the girls in line, which that's pretty unique. For what I've read, that's a really unique thing to yeah, so props to Carl Drew for coming up with a very unique way of pimping his girls out.
Not of beating them, you just satanic them.
Unfortunately, 3 girls did lose their lives. Doreen Levesque, Barbara Raposa, and Karen Marsden. And they basically were pretty brutally beaten in the head, and one of them was even beheaded. So pretty nasty, assholes that they did that. So, but they found, to back up that whole satanic panic type thing, there have been a bunch of animal mutilations that were found in the woods. Apparently, a couple of times cows were found that were basically butchered, not in a we're going to the farm and going to market sort of butchering, but kind of like just the middle of the woods. We're gonna there's a dead cow now. But that kind of butchering. There's been, rabbits and cats and dogs that are found there, which, in the 80s, people are like, satanic panic, satanic panic, satanic panic. Oh my God, it's the devil. They're stealing our kids. And yet it was just like, this is what kids do for fun when there's nothing else to do, is to, be badasses, and to, what's the badass thing you could do when you're around a bunch of Christians is to,
listen to the music.
Listen to music. There it is. D&D, and maybe kill a cat or two, because isn't that kind of like the worst thing you can do in society when you're like 14 years old?
Okay, like we grew up very devoutly religious. I am very unaware of any of our friends growing up being like, I'm going to be a badass and brutally murder an animal.
I'm not saying it happened often, but I'm saying like the problem kids that were really problem kids that all the police were pointing to as the, D&D is going to corrupt our kids and they're all going to be like creating a mass satanic ring across the country that's linked together and is bringing Satan to like, I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying random incidents of kids doing antisocial stuff was kind of linked to, oh my God, as part of this huge way to worship Satan and bring him into the world.
Yeah.
I would be blamed of that these days.
You live in Utah, Carly.
Exactly. I'm just saying, if Satanic Panic were a thing now, I would be screwed.
Oh, Utah needs Satan.
Is there a satanic temple in Utah?
I don't know. I met this girl one time, though, and she was like, I'm a Satanist. And I was like, that's cool. I'm a pagan. And she just shut the right up. She's like, oh.
It's unfortunate.
I don't even know what that means anymore. When people say Satanist, is it like, okay, are you part of the Levian Church of Satan? Are you a devil worshiper? Like, how are
actual Satanists are like pretty chill people.
Yeah, it's like, how are you using that term?
The devil, that's not gonna work.
Like, Satanists technically don't even believe in the devil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They chose that name as a joke.
Yeah. It's all smoke and mirrors and, rituals, and the Black Sabbaths of like Levian Satanists are, it's acting, it's theater.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Is there a satanic temple where you are?
So funny you say that, because there is one in Massachusetts now. It's up in Salem, which is very apropos. And one of my best friends and I were just up in Salem, and one of her old school friends is a member of the Satanic Temple in Salem.
Really?
And we took his walking history tour in Salem, and it was incredibly enlightening and very interesting to learn, like you just said, that the Satanic Temple does not believe in any sort of supernatural deities. So they don't even believe in Satan, like you were saying, in that supernatural sense.
What was that kid that you hung out with, Miko?
Yeah.
Like, he claimed to be a Satanist, didn't he?
Maybe. I don't remember. There's part of my life sort of blacked out, probably.
I just remember him talking about it. I'm like, was he just trying to be like one of these hardcore kids, or was he like, I actually believe this?
Potentially. He also was really into wrestling, and that's what I remember about him.
That's even more of the devil. Just gonna say,
like to his credit, though, he actually did go on into like the local wrestling circuits and like did start doing the stuff that he really like wanted to do. So I was like, props to you, bro. Like,
really? Okay.
I mean, obviously we don't really keep in touch now, but live your dream. I won't yuck your yum.
If that involves wrestling, then go for it.
Yeah, just don't kill animals for fun. Like that I will not be okay with.
That's the line.
Yeah. I do not, even though I like jokingly talked about like dogs and hating dogs, I don't believe in any of that. I'm actually a softie when it comes to that.
You do love Kira.
I'm not a dog person that much, but Kira's amazing.
That's my dog, Charles.
Cute.
Yeah, she's Puerto Rican.
She is.
Like, literally.
She is from the streets of Puerto Rico.
So besides all this weird cult activity, supposedly, there's been also a bunch of suicides. There's a rock that's called Assinet Ledge, and apparently a bunch of folks, when they go there, they suddenly feel the need to jump off the ledge. Now, whether that's the mythical Pukwudgies, as we talked about, who knows? But there's been a lot of suicides that have been found. People have gone to this Freetown State Forest to commit their final act, and whether that's because it's just a forest and people tend to go to places where they can unfortunately hang themselves, and that's where there's trees, or there's something more there. I don't know. But people say that there is something to it.
Mm.
So that's it for the people side of things. The next thing is the cryptids. And this is kind of what was up our alley. And we would love to have heard about this when we were doing our Loch Ness Monster thing from 4,000 miles away.
For those who don't know, what is the definition of a cryptid?
A cryptid is basically a unidentified animal that's or a being that is kind of animal-like, and I'm just pulling this out of my ass, by the way. I don't exactly have a dictionary in front of me, but yeah, it's basically an unidentified mythical animal or animal that has not yet been discovered or identified by mainstream people.
Cool.
I mean, does that sound right?
That does. I just remember one time I was listening to something and they were like, we're going to talk about cryptids. And I was like, what is that? And then I kind of figured it out by the end of it, but I was like, it would have been nice to know.
It's like mythical creatures, anything that you'd see on Harry Potter, something like that. Like dragons could be cryptids, although, you know, I guess some people would think they have to be kind of like things that people have said they've seen that could be real. Dragons, I don't think anyone's saying, oh, there's a bunch of dragons about. But
so like Bigfoot and Nessie would be cryptids.
Exactly. Yeah. Bigfoot. You know, even though they're not using the term Bigfoot, people that have said they've seen Apemen, and during the 60s and 70s, there were actually a bunch of sightings from people of these ape creatures they'd suddenly see in the woods. And, you know, to be honest, I think it was just a bunch of hairy gay men sunning themselves. But, you know,
bunch of bears.
I mean, that sounds like an ape man to me, doesn't it? But yeah, there's people have seen these ape men in the woods, in the swamps. And that's the other thing that really confuses me, is because people have talked about swamps, and like when I think of swamp, I do not think of Massachusetts. Like what we have is not what, when you say swamp, that's not what I think of when I think of Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you say is the definition of a Massachusetts swamp compared to like anyone who's here swamp is going to probably think, oh, like Princess and the Frog and the Bayou and that type of swamp. Like, yeah, Palestina, what's a Massachusetts swamp look like?
What now I would think of that is more of like vernal pools, which are that sort of like springtime wetland area that's very important to a lot of the indigenous species around here, where like frogs and other species, salamanders and stuff, they lay their eggs in these temporary, very marshy areas. That's what I think of as being the swampy areas in our area. But like, I'm also not an ecologist, so that's kind of my guess. But like, even I remember, you know, it's interesting you say that, because my mom always said, oh, well, it's like swampy out back. We never walked through a swamp. Like, I don't know what she was talking about. Maybe it was vernal pools that, you know, she went out one spring and it was really wet and she was like, I'm not there. But like in the summer it was dry. So that's when we were out there. I don't know.
Like we're talking like maybe some, like it's very forested wetlands, right?
Yeah.
Like we're like, there could be like and muddy.
Right.
And like little streams running around with lots of water and mud and leaves and brackets, right?
Yeah, I mean, we also have like a ton of skunk cabbage, so you get that sort of stinky, gross smell.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, like it's not like the Everglades in Florida.
We don't have fucking alligators. That is one cryptid that is not found or even talked about, even in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Wait, are alligators considered cryptids? I think they're real.
I mean, they are real, but okay. Yeah.
Maybe alligators in places they shouldn't be are a cryptid.
There you go.
Look at
There
that
you
too.
go. See, you know what I'm saying. Well, there besides Bigfoot, there are thunderbirds, and thunderbirds, which are
Like
basically
the car?
the cars are just flying around. It's like the Harry Potter car, except it's a Thunderbird. No, Thunderbird is a mythical. It comes from Native American lore, which I think, to be honest, probably sounds a lot more like a white person interpretation of Native American lore. But like people describe it as like pterodactyl type things, which I'm like, I ain't seen nothing like that in Massachusetts. But people have seen them in especially Taunton, Easton, and Norden. In 1971, a police sergeant saw it and he called it in and got laughed at for the rest of his career.
Mm.
Can you imagine being a police officer being like, yo, I just saw a dinosaur?
I'm just surprised he wasn't just like, nope, didn't see it. Nope.
No.
I would have been like, dude, let's go find it.
Guys, this is why Mulder was in the basement at the FBI. I'm just saying.
And then there's the mythical Pukwudgie, and the Pukwudgies are, there's the one account that's everyone always tells about. Every single podcast has talked about Bill Russo and his dog Samantha. Bill was out walking his dog Samantha, and she was like a German Shepherd mix, and he went, and they apparently came to this area. They went through a bunch of brush down by the power lines, and this was in Raynham, down by the dog park, and they came across this weird creature that was about 2 to 3 feet tall, and it was standing there, and the dog got like totally freaked out and was whimpering, and Bill's like, what is going on? And then they see this creature, and the creature's standing there, and it kind of like motions to him and says, Kier. And he want you. He want you, Kier. And apparently, like, he wanted, like, he was beckoning, and Bill's like, oh, hell no. And so, like, they go away, and, he has always said to this point that, he thinks actually that this creature was trying to speak English, and he was saying, we want you, come here.
Nope.
Super creepy.
Yeah.
I am glad he did not listen.
I would have wanted to see what happened if he did.
Like, I wouldn't have listened either, but would I have been curious? Very much.
Well, he'd always said that it never seemed threatening.
Malicious.
Like, it wasn't threatening. It was just standing there, but he kind of got a weird feeling. So I don't know whether that's intuition or,
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, people have talked about other sightings of Pukwudgies, but as far as I could tell, that's kind of the one that's always talked about. And then everyone talks about these other small sightings, and they kind of link the suicides and jumping off rocks to that as well. There's an interesting Native American story. One of the original people to have actually written about the Pukwudgie and basically collected these stories from Algonquin. This was Henry Schoolcraft, who wrote a big volume in the 1950s of Native American stories and culture. And he talked about the Pukwudgies basically ganging up on the creator god Maushop. And basically they killed the creator god.
Oh my.
So these things are pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So in addition to the cryptids, then you get into the UFOs.
Ooh.
Bunch of UFO sightings have been happening in there. And I like that Jetson sound.
Thank you.
But apparently the biggest UFO sighting was in 1979. Once again, seems like the 70s were where we start getting a bunch of people seeing and reporting these things to the newspaper. So maybe it's just before the 70s, people didn't want to talk about this. You know, you would be laughed at and called crazy. And it wasn't until the 70s where people started coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, this happened to me. This happened to me. And news reporters kind of gathered the initial reports, maybe. But you'll find a lot of these reports do come back to the 70s. And in this report, similarly, it was 2 radio reporters that actually, they were legitimate reporters that actually saw this UFO. And so we're not talking like people that are attention seekers. We're talking about people that have some social cred. There's the mysterious that happens out here. There's weird rocks with petroglyphs, such as the Dighton Rock, which is in Berkeley and is covered with petroglyphs from nobody's been able to interpret. Nobody's been able to translate what these mean. No one knows who carved them. Everything from the Phoenicians to early native cultures to the Vikings. I mean, if you name it, it's the same as those crazy Oak Island people that think that it's the Templars that brought all the treasure. But there's these rocks that have weird carvings on them.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot going on there. I mean, already. Doesn't that seem like we've got Bigfoot, we've got Thunderbirds, we've got suicides and cults and UFOs? I mean, doesn't that sound like a lot for just a 200-mile area?
It seems like season 2 of American Horror Story, where you're like, okay,
that or it's
adding
season
in these people.
I mean, with all the talk of Dungeons and Dragons, I was definitely getting Stranger Things vibes, not gonna lie.
I mean, like,
well, I guess that would be actually kind of, even though it seemed like it was the exact same creatures every single season.
I mean, okay. Well, just like season 4 of Stranger Things, you have the character of Eddie with Dungeons and Dragons and Satanic Panic and all that jazz. And I could go on forever on that subject, so I'm going to stop myself now.
Maybe you should do an episode on that. I mean, that was... I just actually went through Stranger Things, and I thought that was like well done. That's what it was like in the 80s, was that kind of panic, from people, and you're just like, listen to yourself. You sound like you're mental.
Because they were.
Palestina, that was my parents. I was literally told by my dad that like D&D would it would turn you into a murderer.
Oh my goodness.
You must not have liked my brother.
He loved your brother, but I don't know how is he
very into D&D?
I don't know that actually. How is it that your family was okay with D&D and mine wasn't?
I don't know.
Where's the thing?
I think what's also very interesting is the religion in which we were raised in, how certain families interpreted and practiced varied so greatly.
I think that's pretty for any religion. That's why we're so at war within religions.
Good point too. And not being raised in multiple religions, I don't have the exposure. So I think that's a really fair point you're bringing up, Carls.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's how people, it's just fascinating, the psychology of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in addition to these mysterious rocks, there also are, of course, a bunch of ghosts. So we've got the paranormal in there too. There's the vanishing hitchhiker on Route 44. He's kind of always described as a guy with a long reddish beard and flannel, a flannel shirt. The what?
I said, I know that guy.
I mean, he sounds like any guy on the streets of Portland, Oregon.
Does it tell you exactly where on 44? Because now I want to go drive that stretch at night. Not gonna lie.
Is that close to you?
Yes, I'm very close to 44, but I'm close to the like Plimpton section of it, so I don't know where. 44 is a long route, so
Just drive the whole thing.
Let
Back
me
and forth.
check. Let me look real quick. Route 44. The good thing about we can consult the Oracle.
I love the Google.
I know. So okay, Route 44, vanishing hitchhiker, redheaded hitchhiker. It says Route 44, Seekonk Rehoboth line.
Oh Jesus, that's really far away.
Oh, is it? Is it really?
I don't know. It feels like that's far away because that's not a town I frequent.
Even though it's like what, 10 miles?
I don't know. I will do my research and I will do my my homework, I should say, and I will report back.
Okay, you better. Back. Yeah, well, you better. We'll have you. You come on for an update.
Okay, or I can post on Instagram for you.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, it's the typical vanishing hitchhiker story where they pick somebody up on the side of the road. Why anybody is picking up a hitchhiker in the middle of the night, I don't know, but they pick them up, they drive, and when they turn around, the person's gone.
Creepy.
So, yeah, pretty creepy. And he has red hair, so I don't know how that. I mean, red hair, they're pretty creepy, anyways.
Well, then how is he existing if he's redhead? Because they don't have a soul.
Oh. Wow. Now, there's a difference between redheads and gingers.
No, there's not.
That is.
There isn't?
No.
I mean,
it's literally the same thing.
It's just what you call them.
Well, redheads, they're either hot or they're not.
I mean, unless you count like fake redheads like me, I am an aerial redhead. That is not natural in any way, shape, or form.
I'm a non-natural redhead right now too.
How many fake redheads are there?
What?
How many fake redheads are there?
A lot.
Quite a few, I would imagine.
I love the whole aerial redhead.
Mine's more like Nicole Kidman from Moulin Rouge.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. Well, there's all sorts of, in addition to the redheads that apparently we all agree that redheads, there's something very fishy and problematic, and we should do an episode on them.
Funny that you use that with Ariel.
Get it? But hey, they're either clean or they're funny. There's been a bunch of sightings of phantom fires, ghosts in the woods, ghosts of native canoe parties, and then in such as Anawan Rock, a very prominent old Native American war chief, Anawan, has been seen many times near the rock. And Anawan was involved in King Philip's War. He was pretty much one of the last of King Philip's chiefs that was actually killed, and he was captured at Anawan Rock.
Oh shit!
So all this weirdness, all this strangeness, which we never heard about, which I'm like, there's so much here. How could we not have heard about it? But there's all sorts of theories as to why this has been going on. And, Massachusetts does have a really weird history. We have in some ways, a very dark history compared to other places. I mean, everybody has a dark history, especially when you're talking about,
settling.
Yeah. Settlers, colonists, the, colonizers. There's a lot of conflict that goes on there. And, but there's two incidents in our history that, really speak out to, that may have contributed, shall we say, or have been, some people claim that that the land itself is cursed. And Hockomock Swamp, which was 3 miles from where we grew up, the Hockomock Swamp is called, the natives called it the place where spirits dwell. So there's a possibility that the land that they acknowledge that this whole land was cursed. And, colonizers, they simply came into this and everybody's living on cursed land. So that's why we're seeing all the shit.
Yeah.
There's a sense that living on cursed land can make people do really, really crazy, really, really bad things, such as in 1692, when pretty much the entire Massachusetts Bay Colony went nuts over the witch panic and the Salem witch trials, which began in Salem Village, but then spread to the entire colony. So, it really was a regional thing that also went over into this whole Bridgewater Triangle thing. And I would argue, and I think Palestina would too, which you could tell me if you do or I'm full of shit, but I would argue that the Salem witch trials are one of it really affected our collective psyche as New Englanders. It's to this day, I would say people from Massachusetts, even the ones that are hyper religious, there's still a mistrust, a suspicion of mixing religion with politics. There's always this kind of rationality that's come through, like and then Salem, it's everywhere. Everybody talks about it. It's not very much taught about everywhere in Massachusetts.
So do you mean like the trials themselves, or like the witch panic is not taught very well?
I don't think the witch panic itself isn't taught very well, because we're always taught that it was Salem instead of it being completely, wide to the colony. But I would say the Salem witch trials helped to propagate it, that it was kind of, what do you call it? It was the journalism side of that really exploded it. And basically, it had mass political ramifications for Massachusetts Bay. The Puritans pretty much lost their hold on power because nobody trusted them after that.
So something really interesting that I learned when we were up in Salem, the trip that we were just talking about a little earlier, is the whole, like, you go to Salem and it's called Witch City, right? And like during the witch trials, like, referring to being a witch was literally the last thing that you wanted to do. And it was because it was such a hub for merchants, and everyone going to, far off lands at the time. And they would go with these stories of witchcraft and, oh yeah, like there's witches in Salem and like yada, yada, yada. And so the Salem witch trials were literally talked about around the world, which is like so interesting. You're talking about the journalism and whatnot. And that's why Salem was revered as this like supernatural crazy space, was because all these crazy Puritans all had vendettas against each other, made up all of these stories to like get each other killed through these trials. But all of the stories were, oh, there were witches and blah, blah, blah. And so people, are hearing these from merchants and sailors and things like that and going, oh, wow, Salem's pretty cool. And that it was just I'm not telling it very well, I'm sure, like retelling it, but it was such an interesting factoid to learn. I'm sorry, I'm like going on a tangent, but yeah, it's really interesting how you bring up like it having ramifications throughout Massachusetts Bay and whatnot. I mean, Massachusetts people in general, like you leave Massachusetts and you're like, why are you talking to me? Right? Like, did you get that? Like when you first started traveling, like I go places where people are like, hey, how are you? And I'm immediately suspicious. Like, why are you talking to me? What do you want? Yeah. What do you need? Like, we don't do that in Massachusetts.
No, a lot of people consider us very standoffish and in some ways very rude people, is how I've heard people saying it.
But then at the same time, like once you're in, you are in, and we are loyal as fuck.
Oh yeah.
But like you got to cut through the shell first.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Hey, it's always there if you can afford the property taxes.
Oof. Yeah, there's that.
And you can get through both a New England winter and a New England summer.
Whew.
But the falls are glorious.
But the middle time, it's real nice.
Spring, it just rains.
See, summer is like my time. And whenever people start complaining in the summer, I'm like, it's better than like 6 feet of snow. And everyone's like, oh no, snow. And I'm like, are you high? No, that's terrible.
See, I'm the other way. Winter is my time. So people are like, it's so cold. I want the sun. I'm like, ah. I'm a vampire. I don't like the sun.
I want the rain, and I want the slight crisp in the air.
Mm.
That sounded
sounds
very
nice.
thoughtful.
Oh, it sounds nice. I want rain and cool, crisp air right now. It's too hot.
Well, the most prevailing theory of all these things that are going on is that all of this could be attributed to the results of King Philip's War. And King Philip's War is, another part that's very talked about in Massachusetts schools and history. But I don't think, once again, we don't talk about how the ramifications of this war. And, this war was a massive conflict. It was one of the first major conflicts on American soil. It lasted from 1675 to 1678, so only about 3 years. And this is basically where the native chief of the Pokanokets, Metacomet, who is called, King Philip, is pretty much what everybody knows him as, colonists and all. So he basically stood. Metacomet was the son of Chief Massasoit, who was he was the head chief of the Pokanokets, who today are known as the Wampanoags. And Massasoit pretty much had formed an alliance with the Pilgrims, the dissenters who had came in 1620. And it was an alliance, which meant that it was strategic on both sides. It wasn't out of the benevolence of their heart that the native peoples welcomed them in. The native peoples, when the Pilgrims came, the native peoples had been decimated. About 80% of them had already died from all sorts of diseases. And when the Pilgrims landed, they actually found empty villages, and that most of the natives had withdrawn and gone and regrouped. And they were, I can't even imagine what that must have been like for the native peoples of that time, where your whole villages are decimated, and here are these newcomers that have come here, and what are they doing here? Well, Chief Massasoit, he saw in these newcomers, let's welcome them. He saw that they had superior weaponry. He saw this was a chance to solidify his own power. And so, I hate to put this as it was very aligning with the Pilgrims was to his advantage, but that's exactly what happened. Massasoit, basically, he, together with the English, they went out and they conducted small raids and wars against their enemies, and he became the big power of that region. And also that's how the Pilgrims were able to get entrenched, because he was the one that was the broker between them, and they had their alliance. That peace between them lasted until Metacomet became the chief. And by this time, we're talking, it's been about 40 years, 1620, about the 1670s. Basically, what the colonists did was they wanted land, and they wanted more land, and they needed to expand. And so they would buy land from the native peoples at dirt cheap prices, turn around and sell it. Typical stuff that's still being done today, land speculation. The native peoples were realizing our people are starving, where our land is being overrun, we're running out of it. And so they kind of resisted and pushed back. Really, the English weren't putting up with any of that. They're like, no. And so basically they got into this huge war, and of course, it was disastrous for both sides. It was probably the deadliest and most devastating war in American history when you consider the population of that time. 1/10 of all the men available for military service in Plymouth colony were pretty much killed. Its casualties were about 2,000 on the native side and 2,800 on the colonial side. So we're talking about a huge amount of losses. 12 towns were absolutely destroyed. Both sides, absolute atrocities. Women and children on both sides were killed. It really was a war of survival.
Oof.
And at the end, in August 1676, Metacomet was killed. He was shot to death. What they also don't talk about, too, is that just like the French Indian Wars, just like the American Revolution, the colonists and the native sides brought in other native people. So that you had natives native tribes fighting on behalf of the colonists. You had alliances among the native tribes. So it really was kind of everybody, the politics, the power dynamics of Massachusetts and New England, which wasn't called that at that time, were absolutely up for grabs, and it changed dramatically. At the end of this, the native peoples drastically lost their power, and the colonials, all of the colonies, Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Plymouth colony were basically virtually decimated. They were bankrupt by all this. They had to basically rebuild so much. Metacomet was, his head was put on a pike and basically stood on top of the fort in Plymouth for 20 years. His right hand was given to the person who shot him, who would trot it out, put it in a bottle of rum and trot it out and say, "Hey, give me a few pence and I'll show you King Philip's arm."
Wow.
I don't know why he sounds like a pirate, but he does.
I really like
Yarr!
the accent.
Interestingly enough, Cotton Mather, who was intricately involved in the Salem witch trials, would talk about seeing King Philip's head in Boston, not in Plymouth. Apparently, at some point, King Philip's head made its way to Boston, where it was displayed, and it was basically falling apart. So Cotton Mather took the jawbone of King Philip and basically put it into his private possessions.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. So basically what I'm getting at is one of the major theories is that all this death and destruction, the native peoples basically being decimated in this, that really essentially cursed the land. And that was because of the way the native peoples were treated, and that the land was cursed because of that.
I believe it.
My personal theory, and I know I'm an oddball, but my theory kind of aligns a little about this, is that I think it's all what I would consider from a psychological standpoint, white man's guilt. You know, most of these sightings, most of them are white folks. They're folks that are in these areas where they've grown up hearing about native peoples. And I think subconsciously there is this, the boogeyman, the dark devil in the woods that used to be the native peoples has now been transformed through subconsciously into these now. This is now what we fear. This is, I don't know if we're sorry that we did this, but I think there is some guilt, and I think it's coming across, and that's what a lot of this is coming from, even if it's not necessarily, people don't talk about it being that because they don't realize it.
Yeah.
Given the time frame that you said, I find it very interesting how you said it's mostly like older stories that you were hearing. I'm not gonna lie, I am Mulder, very much so. I align with him, I want to believe. My husband and I, like, he is Scully. I am Mulder. Um, you know this is true, Josh.
Yes.
And
Barry is very much like Scully. It's great.
yes. But I feel like maybe drugs were involved in a lot of this. Like,
It was the 70s.
right? Like, as soon as you said that, I was like, or it could be acid. I don't know.
Did I see Bigfoot or did I trip on acid?
Why not both?
What if you saw Bigfoot while tripping on acid?
Whoa. I don't even know what to say about that. But then also, what does it say about the sergeant who saw the Thunderbird?
Maybe he was
Was
tripping
he on acid on shift?
I mean, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
True.
Well, that's everything that was going on in my backyard. And one last story that I'd like to tell is that, and this is kind of, the one thing that I did hear about growing up was King Philip's War. Like most kids I was a Boy Scout and I went to scout camp. And I remember at scout camp, them talking about, when they were telling ghost stories, one of the things they did talk about was King Philip being drawn and quartered, and that he was a powerful wizard, and that because they thought all of his body parts would come back together again and he would be resurrected, his body parts were buried in different parts. And they said that one of his body parts was buried right there on the land where King Philip, where the scout camp was. And, I just think that's interesting that's one of the stories, that King Philip still remains a boogeyman to scare generations of kids.
So it wasn't until like last year when I took a ghost tour down in downtown Plymouth that I learned that King Philip's name wasn't actually King Philip. Just to go about like how deep that storytelling goes, and in our area, did not know he was a native, thought he was English.
Really?
Yep.
Well, with a name like Philip, I mean, would you think?
King Philip, I mean,
he could have been fucking like the King of England. I thought he was the King of England. Yeah.
I have a question that I was asked and I did not have an answer for it.
What's that?
I was telling my boss about Bridgewater Triangle, and he was like, "Do you mean the Bermuda Triangle?" And I was like, "No, I mean the Bridgewater Triangle." And he was like, "Well, why is it always a triangle?"
Because
that's a good question.
And I kind of was like, I don't know, because I feel like there's like a few other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head, but they're blah 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 triangle.
Because nobody knows how to spell the fucking Bridgewater parallelogram.
Or is it because we always triangulate with 3 points?
Ooh, well, things of threes. Threes is a magical number.
I was gonna say, it's never like the Bridgewater square or circle. I don't know.
I know there's a bunch of squares in Bridgewater, I can assure you that. Well, that's the Bridgewater Triangle.
This was really, really fun to learn more, because being a native from this area, I learned things today that I did not even know about my own area. Like the Thunderbird, didn't know there was a Thunderbird sighting. And like Carl said, not the car.
We should change it on this podcast and like make people think that it's a bunch of flying cars.
Like in Greece.
Bam,
What? And thank you, Behn, for covering for me since I've been MIA.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell another story. So
I apologize to our listeners.
Don't apologize. You've been busy with theater.
I have. I did a show.
Yeah. How'd it
What
go?
show?
I did. It went really well.
What
It
show
was-
were you in?
It was Monologues from a Movement, #MeToo.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it was a bunch of different monologues and real life tellings of women of sexual assault survivors.
That's
And it
very
was very-
powerful.
It was, which is why I was really excited to be part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what took up most of my time recently. And every time I got home to work on this, I was like,
Well, I hear you've got a doozy for us coming up.
I do. Just need to
Awesome.
figure out
Can't
what
wait.
order I want to tell it in.
Oh my
Mm.
gosh.
Yeah.
I don't want spoilers, but I also want spoilers. Like, I want to know what it is.
I shan't.
You're gonna have to do a TikTok.
I will.
TikTok
We're going to
spoilers.
work on giving a TikTok.
Get on the TikTok.
Yeah, so and I'm still working on that webpage, which I don't know what I'm doing, so that's why it's going so slow.
You know, you can hit up my husband for that help, right?
I could, yeah. I'm just a glutton for punishment. I love Barry. You have to tell him hi.
I will. I'll make him
Yeah.
listen to this episode so he can hear you say it.
Make him have drinks first.
He's already refilled my G&T at least once.
That a man there.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today, and be cool. You're all awesome. You all fun coffineers. You made it to the weekend, and you're going to keep doing well. So we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.